Hi, my name's Tim, and today we're going to do a quick unboxing and assembly for the front rack accessory for the Magicycle e-bike. I got this from Magicycle. They sent it to me to review. Now what I'm seeing here is they've got a bag with some extra bolts, a power extender for the headlight, and a handful of zip ties. And I have the front rack. My initial impression is it's pretty sturdy, nice solidly built. It's got 4 attachments here for attaching different accessories to it. It's got slots, which is nice to attach to the front of the bike head tube. It's nice that there's slots because then if they're slightly off, it'll still fit. I don't know if this rack can be assembled to other bikes. You'd have to make sure that the height, the distance between the front and the top and the bottom slots is the same. And it looks like it has plenty of adjustment side to side for it to work, so that's kind of neat. It does have a hole up here, which I'm assuming is going to be for the headlight. And it says max 10 kilograms. I'll put the conversion on the screen for you. Well, let's get to assembling it. So as you can see, we have the 4 head bolts on the head tube, and these are for the rack, the front rack. And we also have the headlight, which I'm going to have to remove first. So I think I'll start with that. Now, to remove the headlight, the first thing we're going to do is pull apart the connector that holds it on. As always, there's arrows that line up this connector. They go straight together and they come straight apart. We don't twist them, because if you twist them, you'll ruin the pins inside. And it's not easy to pull these apart. Sometimes you have to put a lot of effort into it. This one popped right apart, which is kind of nice. But sometimes you have to really pull on them, so you have to be careful to pull them straight apart so that you don't bend the small pins that are inside. So now that that's done, I'm going to take a number 10 socket and a number 4 Allen wrench, and I'm going to loosen up the headlight here. Okay, now that it's loose, I can take the back nut off, back nut and washer, which I just dropped. And then I'm going to take the headlight out. I'm going to take the bolt out, and I'm going to put the bolt back in, because that will hold the fender. I'm going to get it snug down. I'm going to back it off a turn, because what I want to do is, this fender is slotted here. I want to pull that up a little bit so it's up off the tire. Snug it down, work it all the way up, and then just tighten it down. And the fender is back in place. Next, I want to take my number 4 Allen wrench, and I want to remove the 4 head bolts that came with the bike. Now on each of these bolts, there's a lock nut and or lock washer and a regular washer. Make sure you don't lose those. Okay, now as you can see, I've removed all 4 of the bolts out of the head tube, and I'm going to start assembling the rack on the bike. So this is pretty straightforward. You just take and line up the rack with the holes, and you start the screws, or the bolts I should say. And you might as well start all 4 of them. Looks like the slots are nicely oversized so that you have plenty of room to work. The cables are going to be interesting. So now the first thing I notice when I get the bolts loose fit in and I try to turn the wheel is the wire bundle binds up on the rack. So what we're going to have to do is take the bundle apart and maybe run it up through one of these holes, or the middle hole even, to get the wires to move properly without binding up. So I'm going to have to take off these wraps here, here, and here. And there's also one down here with the zip tie that I'm going to have to clip and reroute those all up through here. Now the brake cable should be able to, you shouldn't have to disassemble that to make it work, because it'll go behind this and you should be able to just zip tie it maybe or something to the rack up here. So I think you'll be fine with the brake cable, but all these wires I think are going to need to run up through the center hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them apart one at a time. I'll pop the connector apart, pull it up through the center hole and put it back on. And hopefully having it coming up through the center hole will take up all the slack issues. So please remember, pull these straight apart, don't twist them. Unfortunately, it seems like all 4 of these need to come apart. So in this case, you're going to want to remember what goes where. I'm going to put blue tape on the 2 brake sensors, and then hopefully I'll be able to tell the difference between the brake sensor and the throttle and the LCD. So I'm going to grab a little blue tape. Well, I didn't have any blue tape, but I had some masking tape, so we'll use that instead. This is just to identify and make sure I know what is what. So this is a brake sensor. So I put a little masking tape on that one. This is the throttle. This is the brake sensor. I'll also put that on there. Pull this brake apart. Pull the throttle off. The throttle's yellow. And the LCD screen is green. Now that this wire is loose, I can run it back up through here. Now make sure when you're putting these together that you line up. There's a little tab inside the male end, and there's a slot inside the female end. Make sure you line those up and push the connector straight together. Got them all back on the way they were. Take off my little masking tape indicators. Notice now that the wire bundle comes up through the rack. The only 2 things that are still outside are the brake, brake, shifter, and brake. And that, it looks like, may be a problem, because these cables, I guess I can wrap them up here. So the cables are going to have to be zip tied to the top of the rack here, otherwise you're going to have some issues with turning. So now that I put the wires up through the center, I'm going to shift the slots on the bolts so they're in the right place. Then I'm going to go ahead and tighten those down, snug them up. So I'll do one on the top, I'll get the slots centered up, and then I'll do the kitty corner one on the bottom. And just making sure the slots are semi-centered, and then I'll tighten up the other 2. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down so the rack is secured in place. That's fully secured. And I'm going to open up the packet that came with the front rack, and I'm going to take out the headlight extender. I'm going to again make sure I line up the tabs very carefully so the pins don't get bent. Put that in. And it looks like in the bag there's 4 bolts in case you don't have the bolts for the head tube, so that's nice that they give you replacement bolts. And then there's another bolt that has Loctite already on it and a couple of washers and a lock nut. And that's to put the headlight on here. So this is a pretty simple process. Is you put a washer on the bolt, then you'll put the bolt through the rack. You'll put the nut and the lock, or the washer and the lock nut on the back. Use my socket. And I'll tighten that down. I'm going to also bring the light up so it sits and looks forward. And I'll tighten down the nut until that's good and secure. Okay. And then my last step, or the next step, would be to finish attaching the headlight cord. Again, lining up the tab and slot, pushing the connector straight together. Now the rack is secure. I've got the headlight attached, and these cords are run through the center hole. The cables will have to be zip tied up here. I'm a little concerned because there's not a lot of space between the bike stem and the top of the rack, but in a future video I'm going to take this bike stem off and put on an adjustable one to bring the handlebars up, and that'll eliminate that problem. So I'm going to go ahead and do some wire bundling and making sure that everything turns properly and getting stuff zip tied into place so it's not hanging down and possibly hitting the wheel. I'll zip tie this up, that type of thing. And we'll be off to the races. Now this is a little tight. I'm not super happy about the way the cables fit under here, but it's good enough for now. It's a good idea as you do your wire bundling to make sure that everything continues to turn without binding up. Otherwise you can get yourself in a spot where you've bundled it together and you have to take it all the way back apart again if you don't. Looks like everything turns. I'm going to clip off this this zip tie. I'm going to grab another zip tie and remember to do the headlight. Then clip off any excess with your wire clippers. So now this wire can't dangle down and hit the front tire. The rack is on, and I think we're good to go. Obviously, before you finish up, what you want to do is turn on your bike and make sure everything seems to be working. So I'm going to turn on the headlight. So the headlight's working. Now one thing about this, if you put the headlight on the rack like this, the headlight's always going to be facing forward. It won't turn with the wheel anymore. So that's something to keep in mind. It looks to me like it has plenty of clearance to everything. It is way out in front of you, but it is still behind the front of the tire. So if you were to run into something with the bike, with the tire, you still wouldn't hit the headlight. You might be able to change that configuration around a little bit to get it back underneath a little further, but just make sure as you push your shocks down that you don't hit the, you don't actually hit the fender or the light on the tire. That brake light works, that brake light works. Throttle works, and I think we're good to go. So that concludes the assembly of the front rack to the bike. It looks like it has a pretty big space here, so you could attach a basket to it, or you could get some straps if you wanted to strap things down. Other than a slightly tight clearance here, I'm going to say it went okay. I love the way that they had the extra room in the slots to assemble to the head tube so that any kind of dimensional variance wouldn't mess you up. All in all, it's not bad. I have to say it's okay. I'm not a big fan of front racks, but I like when they're functional, and this one is definitely functional. So I'm going to wrap up the video here. If you like what you saw, give me a like. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below, and I will catch you next time. Oh, by the way, Enjoy the outtakes. I'm going to take this outside and get you some good video of what the rack looks like on the bike.